Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. Tonight's main headlines. In the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, this evening, which monitors the 8-year-old war in Syria, has said today that at least 23 fighters with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and 6 fighters with a Turkish-backed Syrian rebel group have been killed in the attacks mounted by the Turkish Air Force and also continuous shelling since the beginning of Turkey's invasion of its northern Syria's northern frontier. The SDF, which is the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, said that the airstrikes and the shelling had also killed 9 civilians. In an apparent attempt by Kurdish-led forces to retaliate, mortar fire from Syria killed 3 people, including 1 child, in the Turkish border town of Akikali, a hospital and security sources have said. The International Rescue Committee has said that 64,000 people have already fled since the campaign began. According to the observatory, the towns of Ras Al Ain and Darbi Sayah, some 60 kilometres or 37 miles to the east, have already been largely deserted as a result of the Turkish attack. The observatory said that Turkish forces had seized 2 villages near Ras Al Ain and 5 near the town of Tel Al-Bayad. The Turkish President, Erdogan, told members of his AK party in Ankara that 109 militants had been killed so far. The Turks said that they were resisting the assault. This is, of course, in response to the rather furious assault from Turkey, which was launched yesterday and has continued today with continued attacks with both ground forces now engaged with the Turkish forces occupying the area nearest to the Kurdish forces occupying a strip of land nearest to Turkey's border. According to a senior Turkish security official, the armed forces struck weapons and ammunition depots with gun and sniper positions, tunnels and military bases. Jets flew operations up to 30 kilometres or 18 miles inside Syria. A Reuters journalist saw shells exploding just outside Tel Al-Bayad. The operation is currently continuing with the involvement of all of our units, Erdogan said in his speech. The US President Trump, who has faced rare criticism from senior figures in his own Republican Party, who accuse him of deserting loyal US allies, said on Twitter that he was talking to both sides, and he warned Ankara that it would be hit hard financially if it did not play by the rules. The SDF have been the main allies of the US forces on the ground in the battle against Islamic State since 2014. They've been holding thousands of captured IS fighters and tens of thousands of their relatives in detention. NATO member Turkey had said that it intends to create a safe zone for the return of millions of refugees to Syria, but world powers fear the operation could intensify Syria's 8-year-old conflict and runs the risk of Islamic State prisoners escaping from camps amid the chaos. Erdogan sought to assuage these concerns by saying the militants from the jihadist group would not be allowed to rebuild a presence in the region. Erdogan took aim at the European Union and Arab powers, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which have voiced opposition over the operation. He has apparently been threatening to unleash 3.6 million Syrian refugees into the EU. The United Nations Security Council was due to meet on Thursday to discuss Syria at the request of 5 European members. The letter to the 15-member council Turkey said its military operation would be proportionate, measured and responsible. The 22-member Arab League said it would hold an emergency meeting on Saturday. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned Turkey's military incursions and cautioned about the possibility of ethnic cleansing. Israel is prepared to extend humanitarian assistance to the gallant Kurdish people, he wrote on Twitter. And Russia has said it plans to push for dialogue between Syria and Turkish governments following the incursion. Now, this is leading on from this story now, the fact that tens of thousands of civilians have now fled the Turkish offensive in Syria. Aid workers also have joined the exodus amid warnings that the campaign against Kurdish forces will put hundreds of thousands of lives at risk. Tens of thousands of civilians have taken flight in an effort to escape the fighting after the Turkish troops began a military operation against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria, the UN Refugee Agency has said. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, more than 60,000 people have already fled their homes since Wednesday. And they've also been followed by dozens of aid workers who crossed the border from northeastern Syria into Turkey after agencies had ordered a widespread evacuation in anticipation of an expanded Turkish push into the region. The exodus has kept the border officials busy throughout the Thursday morning, and aid workers have said that they've been told to leave by their organisations, and most had done so reluctantly. Aid agencies, military leaders and senior international officials have warned that hundreds of thousands of people are in immediate danger from Turkey's newly announced offensive targeting Turkish forces in northern Syria. Hundreds of thousands of civilians in northern Syria are now in harm's way, said Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must not be the target. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces warned of an imminent humanitarian catastrophe as NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg and the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker both appealed to Turkey to avoid adding to the instability in Syria. Syria is already hosting one of the world's most complex humanitarian crises, with millions of people displaced both within and outside of its borders, and the Turkish offensive announced on Tuesday threatens to add a frightening new dimension. Hundreds of thousands of civilians in northern Syria are now in harm's way. They've said this already. I think we're just hearing the same story again. The UNHCR has called on parties to adhere to international humanitarian law, including providing access for aid agencies. The agency has said that they do not want civilian infrastructure to be targeted by the Turkish forces. In a sharp-edged remark aimed at Turkey, Jean-Claude Juncker pointed out that the EU is contributing €6 billion to Turkey to help support the 3.6 million Syrian refugees in the country, adding that Europe would not contribute to the creation of a safe zone in northern Syria. I call on Turkey, as well as all the other actors, to act with restraint and to stop operations already as we are speaking underway, said Juncker. While acknowledging that Turkey has security concerns with its border in Syria, Juncker said, if the Turkish plan involves the creation of a so-called safe zone, don't expect the European Union to pay for any of it. Stoltenberg from the NATO side has said in a news conference in Rome that while Turkey is a NATO ally, it has legitimate security concerns, and it's important to avoid actions which may further destabilise the region and escalate tensions and cause even more human suffering. Aid agencies have said that those in the area where the controversial offensive is focused have already survived the brutality of the Islamic State era, and many have been displaced multiple times since the beginning of Syria's long war. Now, among those raising concern was the International Rescue Committee, which has warned as the Turkish offensive in Syria begins, the IRC is deeply concerned about the lives and livelihoods of the 2 million civilians in northeast Syria who have already survived ISIS brutality and multiple displacements. A military offensive could displace 300,000 more people and disrupt life-saving humanitarian services, including the IRC's. Anyway, we're leaving that story now and moving on to another aspect of this, which actually brings us right back to Scotland again. And this is the response of 33 Scottish MSPs to the unfolding tragedy in Syria. 33 MSPs have signed a letter to the US ambassador to express their alarm after Turkey launched an offensive into northeast Syria, beginning with the bombardment of civilian areas. The Scottish politicians raise objections to the deeply dishonourable withdrawal of US forces, and they call for the decision to be reversed immediately. Turkey's military action commenced after the United States withdrew its support from the area, even after a period of weeks where it compelled the Syrian Democratic Forces to demolish their border defences. Actions taken on the understanding that they would be protected by American efforts to restrain Turkey. Now, it's obvious now that without the American soldiers in that situation, that promise could no longer be delivered. This issue was raised also at First Minister's questions by Patrick Harvey of the Scottish Green Party today. The letter to Robert Wood Johnson, coordinated by the cross-party group on Kurdistan in the Scottish Parliament, has been signed by party leaders Patrick Harvey, Willie Rennie, Richard Leonard, as well as the whole Scottish Greens group of MSPs. And it says, "We write to urgently express our concern at President Trump's decision to withdraw US forces from northeast Syria, allowing for a Turkish invasion which has now begun." And it continues, "Out of the chaos that has consumed Syria for almost 10 years, Kurdish forces in northeastern Syria have not only liberated millions from extremism and tyranny, but have in its place established a system of secular and democratic governance, one which is all the more remarkable for its commitment to women's participation at every level. In recent days, the US-led Combined Joint Task Force, Inherent Resolve, as it is known, compelled the SDF to demolish defensive fortifications along the Turkish-Syrian border. This action was conducted with the understanding that it would address Turkey's security concerns and that US efforts would continue to guarantee the safety of people in northeast Syria from potential Turkish military action. To follow this with the immediate withdrawal of US forces and the American consent for a Turkish invasion is nothing other than a gross act of betrayal and is deeply dishonourable. And so that ends the statement from the cross-party and Greens group on the recent withdrawal of American troops from the Turkish border area. Now we're moving on to a completely different tack now. And this is a story about the Scottish Health Minister. I beg your pardon. We are looking at, I beg your pardon, Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar. If we seem to have got something out of place here. Okay. Today, Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar met in a small wedding venue in the north of England to discuss in detail the ongoing problems concerning the Irish backstop and how to resolve them. And apparently successful meeting. Both men appeared in a news conference shortly after the meeting to declare that they had positive talks and could both see, I think the phrase was, a pathway to a new Brexit deal. The venue for this meeting, Thornton Manor in England, is, as I said, a fairly quiet place out of the way. Obviously, they were looking for some neutral ground to have this preliminary discussion leader to leader. And with just 3 weeks to go before the United Kingdom is due to leave the world's biggest trading bloc, it is still unclear on what terms it will leave or indeed whether it will at all. Ireland holds the key to any deal and will have to consent to any solution to the hardest Brexit riddle of all: how to prevent the British province of Northern Ireland becoming the backdoor into EU's market without having any border controls. The European Union fears that controls over the 500 kilometre or 300-mile Irish border with Northern Ireland would undermine the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which ended 3 decades of sectarian and political conflict that killed over 3,600 people. As both sides positioned for another delay, followed by a British election or an acrimonious divorce from the EU on the 31st of October, Boris Johnson met Leo Varadkar at Thornton Manor in Cheshire on Thursday. They agreed that they could see a pathway to a possible deal, Johnson and Varadkar had said in a joint statement, and both continue to believe that a deal is in everybody's interests. They have agreed to reflect further on their discussions and that officials would continue to engage intensively on them, they said. There is little more detail on this. Apparently, on the back of this announcement, sterling rose 1% against the dollar. The political editor of the Irish Times, Pat Leahy, had said that Britain had made significant movement during the talks, which sent sterling soaring even higher. EU diplomats, though, are sceptical of the chances of a deal, and most expect Johnson to be forced to accept a delay to Brexit, a step which could ultimately lead either to a disorderly exit or to the reversal of the entire Brexit endeavour. Although Johnson has insisted Britain will leave on the 31st of October, even if no agreement is reached, the British Parliament has passed a law saying that he must request a delay. Also in this story, talking about Ireland itself, the Republic of Ireland, Brexit descended into a public row now between London and Brussels this week after Downing Street sources said that a Brexit deal was essentially impossible because the German Chancellor Angela Merkel had made unacceptable demands. The Irish border had been largely invisible since army checkpoints were taken down after 1998's peace deal, and largely ended the violence between the region's pro-British majority and an Irish nationalist minority. Politicians have warned that the reimposition of physical infrastructure on the border when it becomes the EU's external frontier would anger Irish nationalists in Northern Ireland who aspire to unification with the Republic, and would help militants opposed to the peace deal to recruit new members. To get around this problem, the EU agreed to an insurance policy known as the Irish backstop last November with Johnson's predecessor Theresa May. The withdrawal agreement, which May struck, says that the United Kingdom will remain in a customs union unless and until alternative arrangements are found to avoid a hard border. Okay, let's move on to the next story, and we are now going to the response of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who has also waded in a little bit to the entire Brexit circus, you might say. Macron has said that Britain will have to pay the price over any unacceptable Brexit move. Britain will have to pay the price should it decide to proceed with a position over Brexit that is unacceptable to the 27 other EU countries, the French President Emmanuel Macron has said on Thursday. If they want to make a move which is compatible with what we've accepted by the 27, then it is fine, said Macron, speaking in English at an event in Lyon. If they want to make any move or make something which is not accepted, then they would have to take responsibility. Okay, so that was the response of Emmanuel Macron to the deepening crisis over Brexit. Okay, so we're moving on now to a story about EU nationals, and this is a story where the Tories have admitted that EU nationals are lacking settled status could actually be removed from the UK. The Security Minister, Brandon Lewis MP, said that EU nationals lacking settled status after 2021 could be removed from the UK. Now, 2021 was the deadline for leaving the EU if we had a deal. This was the end of the period of transition, if you like. Now, Mr. Lewis's threat came in an interview today with German newspaper Die Welt, and this is the first time that the UK government has admitted what could happen to EU citizens living in the UK if they do not apply, for settled or pre-settled status by the deadline. The SNP has consistently called on the UK government to implement automatic permanent residence for EU nationals and their families already in the UK to avoid another situation similar to the Windrush scandal, saying that it's impossible the settled status scheme will achieve 100% registration. Even missing the target by 10% would see hundreds of thousands of EU nationals removed from the UK or placed in a situation where just leading a life here would be impossible. In commenting, SNP spokesperson for immigration, Stuart MacDonald MP, said, "This statement from a UK minister is utterly deplorable. Instead of issuing threats to EU citizens who've spent years building their lives here, he should be focusing on helping them to stay." It's a clear admission that there are fundamental problems with the settled status scheme and a very real potential for hundreds of thousands of people to go from being legal residents to undocumented migrants overnight. And yet the Tories continue to willfully sit on their hands and do nothing to address it. The UK government is completely ignoring the looming threat that would not only see thousands of people being forced to leave their homes in the UK, but also to leave thousands of, to leave thousands more, beg your pardon, unable to work, rent somewhere to live, or access free healthcare, or even to open a bank account in order to continue leading their life in the UK. And I have said it's time that Tories at Westminster stopped playing with people's lives and implemented the automatic permanent residence for EU nationals and family members. Otherwise, he said, we will see a repeat of the Windrush scandal, but on a much larger scale. Okay. Now, we're moving now to a story about the Brexit Party. And this is a story about the Brexit Party's MEPs. They're members of the European Parliament who have apparently voted against a measure introduced by the EU to combat Russian propaganda. Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party have voted against stronger European measures aimed at countering a highly dangerous Russian disinformation. The party cast their votes against a European Parliament resolution calling for an upgrade of the EU's anti-propaganda unit, East Stratcom, as well as support for public service media. The text passed comfortably with the support of the largest political groups in the European Parliament, the centre-right European People's Party, the Socialists, Liberals and Greens. In the resolution, the MEPs also criticised Facebook, accusing the social media company of not following up on most of the Parliament's demands to prevent a repeat of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where at least 87 million people had their data harvested without their permission and used for a targeted ad campaign in the 2016 presidential elections. I beg your pardon, I'm just hearing that we're coming to okay, so we're actually going to move on to a story about Jeremy Corbyn now. Okay. So bear with me just a moment. We'll find Jeremy Corbyn for you. Here we are. Okay, so this story is Jeremy Corbyn setting out an election pitch and targets another upset. The Labour leader says that he aims to tackle inequality and to give young people hope. This in his statement today. Jeremy Corbyn has pledged to pull off another general election upset and recover from poor polling to deny Boris Johnson a return to Downing Street, as he effectively kicked off Labour's campaign with a so-called alternative Queen's speech setting out his key policies. Speaking to party activists in Northampton, where both parliamentary seats are held by Conservative MPs with tiny majorities over Labour, Corbyn has reeled off a list of plans in areas including Brexit, inequality, education, the NHS, housing, crime and climate emergency. Okay, well, we have a little story which has just come in. So this is just in. This is breaking news. It's just been revealed by the BBC today, actually, on their political podcast, that former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale has left the party over its stance on Brexit. The former leader, who was in charge of the party during a 2-year period between 2015 and 2017, did not vote for the party at the European elections held in May. The BBC has reported that the former Lothians MSP, who has since taken up a job at the John Smith Centre at a university, terminated her party membership in the summer, having previously clashed with Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Now, Ms Dugdale, who controversially appeared on the reality TV show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, was also unhappy at her treatment by the party in her legal battle with pro-independence blogger Stuart Campbell, the editor of Wings Over Scotland. She said the party had dropped her like a sack of potatoes over the case. Ms Dugdale previously described the Labour Party as sick and told a magazine after stepping down from the Holyrood that there's something very fundamentally wrong at that level. If the roots are rotten and not right, you can't expect the rest of the team to flourish. She was succeeded as Scottish Labour leader by Richard Leonard, who is seen as close to the UK-wide leader Jeremy Corbyn. Former parliamentary aide Miss Dugdale, who had previously said it was not inconceivable that she would back independence at a future referendum, publicly backed Owen Smith in his unsuccessful leadership challenge against Corbyn. Their relationship was understood to have been damaged by the endorsement, with further splits also emerging from the party's Brexit stance. Now, hopefully, we shall be able to return to the running order now. Give me a moment while I... Okay, so we are now going to look at businessmen who linked to Donald Trump in the current Ukraine scandal, who've been arrested on US charges. This coming from Washington. Two foreign-born Florida businessmen associated with US President Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, have been arrested on suspicion of conspiring to funnel foreign money to US political candidates, officials have said on Thursday. The businessmen, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, were arrested in connection with a New York case involving campaign finance laws, a spokesman for the US Attorney's Office in Manhattan has said. The arrests were the latest dramatic development in a political drama that threatens Trump's presidency. They come as the Democratic-led US House of Representatives conducts an impeachment inquiry into the Republican president centred on Trump's request in a July telephone call for Ukraine's president to investigate the former Vice President Joe Biden, a leading Democratic rival in the 2020 presidential election. Parnas is a Ukrainian businessman. Fruman is a real estate investor who was born in Belarus. Both, according to various media accounts, have helped to introduce Giuliani to top Ukrainian political circles. Now, Parnas and Fruman conspired to funnel foreign money to candidates for federal and state office, according to a federal court filing in New York. The two men made illegal contributions using straw donors, according to the indictment. John Dowd, the lawyer for the two men, declined to comment on the charges. The two men had been planning to fly to Vienna on Wednesday night, according to a source familiar with the matter. Why they were going to fly at that point into that area, I have no idea. But Parnas and Fruman were expected to appear in federal court in Virginia later on Thursday, the Wall Street Journal has reported, citing people familiar with the matter. The journal has also described the two men as donors to a pro-Trump fundraising committee who helped Giuliani's efforts to investigate Biden. Two other people who were charged in the indictment were David Correa, a US businessman, and Andrei Kukushkin, a Ukrainian-born US businessman. The Campaign Legal Center, a non-profit that favours campaign finance regulation, had urged the US government agency in July 2018 complaint to investigate whether Parnas and Fruman had broken the law by using a shell company to disguise the source of a $325,000 donation to a pro-Trump political action committee. The CLC later supplemented its complaint to the US Federal Election Commission to include evidence of wire transfers showing the movement of funds. Parnas told Reuters last month that he knew the FBI was investigating him, but was not sure why. I don't know what the FBI wants, Parnas had said at the time. Parnas had said that any violations of Federal Election Commission rules were unwitting and a clerical thing because he was not an experienced political donor. Parnas had said he was not trying to hide the source of the $325,000 donation. He had said he'd given the money to America First Action Committee because we are huge supporters of the president. Now, this is on the back of various allegations of political interference from abroad. Nancy Pelosi, who as the House Speaker is the top Democrat in the chamber, launched the impeachment inquiry last month after the revelation that Donald Trump had sought foreign interference in the 2020 US election. A whistleblower complaint to Congress also raised concern about Trump's leveraged £400 million in US aid to try to secure the promise from Ukraine's president to investigate Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. I understand Hunter Biden does have business interests in the Ukraine. President Trump has denied wrongdoing and has described the probe as a partisan smear. Democrats are getting impatient with the administration's blocks on its investigation. Republicans are now refusing to answer the simplest question, whether it's acceptable for a president to pressure foreign countries to undermine our elections. American elections should be decided by Americans, not by favours from foreign governments, Pelosi tweeted on Thursday. Which leads us to another part, the other half, if you like, of this story, and that is the Ukrainian leader, Vladimir Zelensky. And he was interviewed today as well, and has said that he would be ready to open a probe into any Ukrainian interference in the 2016 US presidential election and into the company where former Vice President Joe Biden's son was a board member. Ukraine has been unwillingly drawn into a political battle in Washington between President Trump and his Democrat opponents over allegations that Trump used military aid as leverage to pressure Zelensky to open these investigations. Me a moment. Zelensky told reporters that Trump did not seek to blackmail him during the phone call in July or at a meeting in September. The US House of Representatives has launched an impeachment inquiry against Trump focused on whether he used congressionally approved aid to Ukraine as leverage to pressure Zelensky into investigating Biden, one of Trump's main Democratic rivals, as he seeks re-election in 2020. Now, Trump has made allegations without evidence that Biden engaged in improper dealings in the Ukraine, and Biden's son Hunter was on the board of Ukrainian gas company Burisma. Okay, so Zelensky has said he's open to a joint investigation into Burisma and into the 2016 US election, but he has stressed that Ukraine was an independent country with independent law enforcement agencies whose work he had no right to influence. Now, we are now moving back closer to home to a story this time about the First Minister and her praise for local authorities on their progress in green issues. Now, local authorities are already making hugely important contributions to the fight against climate change, and they have a crucial role to play in helping decarbonise the economy, the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said today. Speaking at the COSLA annual conference in St Andrews, this is the Council for Local Authorities, in St Andrews during Climate Week, the First Minister said 2 weeks ago the Scottish Parliament passed their new climate change bill, which contains the most ambitious targets for reducing emissions of any country in the world. Efforts by local authorities, for example, such as reducing transport emissions, promoting energy efficiency and managing waste, have already helped Scotland to make significant progress. Glasgow City Council aims to be the first net zero emissions city in the UK. And that's one more reason why Glasgow will be the perfect host for the UN's climate change conference, COP26, later next year. We worked closely with local authorities in developing our latest programme for government, said the First Minister, which sets out the next steps in Scotland's transition to a net carbon zero economy and how we will work with and support local authorities in achieving that. For example, we have announced that we will work with local authorities to upgrade and to further decarbonise Scotland's bus services. That work will be supported with a £5 million £5 million of investment. We're working with councils to pilot and implement local heat and energy efficiency strategies, which is an area of huge potential. We've also announced that we will work with local government to establish a green growth accelerator. This will enable local authorities to invest in and to attract greater private investment in projects which reduce emissions and boost growth. We will work with local authorities to design the accelerator over the coming months, effectively developing a form of green city region deal. This is another excellent example of the collaborative approach that we intend to take with local authorities. So this story from the Scottish Government today. This also brings us on to another story involving the Scottish Government. This one we briefly touched on about a week ago on the programme, which was the announcement of extra money to combat homelessness. And the Scottish Government today has managed to put some figures on this. Homelessness is being targeted with £164,000 of extra funding this winter, with a range of programmes across Scotland that will benefit, helping people, especially during the winter, who are rough sleeping and often have backgrounds of significant trauma. The funding is in addition to the significant amount of money that local authorities receive from the Scottish Government to support people experiencing homelessness. So this is an additional extra piece of funding, rather unexpected, I think, which has been provided by the Scottish Government to local authorities. The money from Ending the Homelessness Together Fund will support flexible emergency funding so that frontline workers can provide immediate help to people at risk of rough sleeping in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and also Aberdeen. Additional emergency beds for the Bethany Night Shelter in Edinburgh, an additional link worker for Edinburgh to support people moving through emergency accommodation and into mainstream housing, and information resources in other languages so that people who do not speak English are made aware of the help that is available. Okay. Well, these are obviously highly significant programmes, and the Scottish Government is obviously well on top of the problems relating to its day job. That is about it, and all we have time for this evening on Scotland at 7. But, I beg your pardon, we have one more story. I beg your pardon, I'm mishearing things in my ear. I beg your pardon. Okay. R100 progress. Now, this is to do with the procurement for broadband, as far as I understand it. And this R100 broadband programme has been decided. BT plc has been confirmed as the bidder for 2 of the 3 reaching 100% broadband programme areas in Scotland. The procurement was split into 3 areas, north, central and south, and BT plc was the only bidder for the central and south areas. Further details of the bid will be announced when the contracts are signed later this year. Now, Ofcom's most recent Connected Nations report showed that Scotland outperforms the UK as a whole when it comes to new broadband deployment. So, again, Scotland getting in early and managing to stay ahead of the curve, as usual, when it comes to broadband. Now, moving to the last couple of stories this evening, and we're now looking at the award for the Swedish Academy has announced laureates for the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, these 2 Nobel Prizes, one is to the Polish novelist and activist Olga Tokarczuk and the controversial Austrian author Peter Handke, have both won the Nobel Prize in Literature. The choice of Tokarczuk and Handke comes after the Swedish Academy promised to move away from awards male-oriented and Eurocentric past. Tokarczuk, an activist and public intellectual and a critic of Poland's politics, won the 2018 award and was cited by the committee for her narrative imagination and encyclopedic passion that represents the crossing of boundaries as a form of life. She is a bestseller in Poland, has become much better known in the UK since winning the 2018 Booker International Prize for her 6th novel, Flights. The Nobel Committee's Anders Olsen, bear with me a moment here, Anders Olsen said that her work, which centres on migration and cultural transitions, was full of wit and cunning. And picking Handke, who was cited for an influential work that with linguistic ingenuity, has explored the periphery and the specificity of human experience. As the 2019's winner has already provoked controversy. The Kosovo ambassador for the US, Vlora Sitatu, has called the decision scandalous and preposterous. So we have one rather contentious winner of the prize for literature. Now, finally, this evening, we are turning to Scottish cultural figures uniting now behind a manifesto for independence. In a 12-point declaration, 50 cultural heavyweights have united to publish their own manifesto for independence, a prospectus of guiding principles on independence for Scotland. The signatories have affirmed that the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs, as outlined in the 1989 Claim of Right. They also call for a written constitution, the rejection of weapons of mass destruction, commitment to human rights, and an open society where all citizens have opportunities to lead the best and most fulfilling lives that they can. The manifesto concludes, "It is our belief that the best option now open to the Scottish people is for Scotland to become an independent country. The alternative is to accept that Scotland's fate would remain in the hands of others and that Scotland's people would relinquish their right to decide their own destiny." The signatories to the manifesto include well-known actor Brian Cox, historian Sir Tom Devine, and the novelist Val McDermid. Keith Brown, Deputy SNP leader, has said, "This is a very welcome and hugely significant intervention, showing that it is the vision of Scotland as a successful independent country which offers people hope at a time when the UK government and Westminster parties have brought only despair." Well, there are several more names on this list. I mean, it reads like it reads a litany of Scottish, a who's who of Scottish cultural life. Ian Anderson, broadcaster. Peter Arnott, playwright. Neil Aitchison, journalist and writer. Ali Bain, musician. Margaret Bennett, folklorist and singer. Robert Black, QC, Professor Emeritus of Scots Law. Christine Borland, a visual artist. Stuart Braithwaite, actually somebody I know. Hello, Stuart, from Mogwai, a musician. Callum Colvin, a visual artist. Roddy Buchanan, visual artist. Stuart Cosgrove, well-known writer and broadcaster. Brian Cox, as we said, the actor. Robert Crawford, a writer. Sir Tom Devine, Professor Emeritus of Scottish History. Larry Donn, a writer. Jenny Fagan, another writer. The Reverend Richard Holloway, writer and broadcaster. Robert Hodgins, musician. Kathleen Jamie, poet and writer. Jamie Johnsey, another writer. A.L. Kennedy. Liz Lockhead, poet, playwright and former Macker. Val McDermid, another famous author. Jamie McDougall, singer and broadcaster. Lorraine McIntosh. Dr. Dolina McClellan, writer and broadcaster. Angus MacNeil, poet and broadcaster. Dr. Anne Matheson, a literary historian. Karen Matheson, singer. Alexander Moffat, the artist. Gemma Neville, the author. Andrew O'Hagan, another writer. Aidan O'Rourke, musician and composer. Don Patterson, poet. Karen Polwart, musician and writer. Eddie Reader, another famous Scottish singer. Professor Alan Riach, poet and academic. James Robertson, a writer. Ronald Shaw, musician, composer and producer. Ross Sinclair, visual artist. Donald Smith, storyteller. The famous Elaine C. Smith, as everybody will know, the actor. Alan Spence, writer. Will Storer, minister and academic. Gerda Stevenson, a writer and actor. Sheena Wellington, singer. Professor Gary West, musician and broadcaster. And finally, Ruth Wishart, journalist and broadcaster, who I understand had a major role in the preparation of this manifesto for independence. So I think you can see there that is basically a who's who of all the literary and artistic figures in Scotland who have signed this document today. That is, as I said earlier on, a bit abruptly, the end of tonight's show. And as usual, we have to remind you that making television programmes is, of course, an expensive business. And we rely on people like you to help support Broadcasting Scotland by becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. And you can do that for £5 a month. Details of how to get in touch with us and how to sign up for this appear on your screen just now. So please sign up and become a supporter. That is it from Scotland at 7 this evening. I will be back again on Monday. Meantime, Broadcasting Scotland will be covering, as far as I understand it, the SNP conference, which is coming up this coming weekend, I think. So I will be back on Monday. In the meantime, from all of the team here at Scotland at 7, a very good night to you.